Excited to have you all here. Thanks for coming today. Thanks to Julie for kicking us off there. So as Rob said, I'm kicking off this section that we're calling Your Building Problem. So we're going to jump right in. These are going to be 3 pretty quick talks. A lot of content in these, but hopefully some good stuff you can take away. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is some tips on how to keep UX design and development in sync. So I'm going to share 5 different ways to do that. And I should share too that I'm the creative director at Sparkbox, and got a couple other designers following me up that are kind of going to build on this talk. So let's state the problem first, right? So this is the problem we're trying to avoid most of the time. As you're building a digital product or website, the end result can start to stray from the original UX and design vision. Things start to get out of whack. Maybe some design polish isn't there. And we've all kind of been here. So these 5 different remedies I'm going to share with you today kind of address this problem. So, and at the root of this is really communication, right? So let's jump right in. So number 1 here, identify the gaps. Where are those communication gaps happening? And you can kind of treat this a lot like a UX research problem. So ask a lot of questions. You can interview team members. You probably have a pretty good idea of some of the things that are happening and some pain points. But it'd be great to kind of just do some research and gather all of the pain points from your team. And then you figure out what points in the project is the team's communication failing. So, is it at the beginning? Is it in the middle? Is it at the end? Is it all of those things? And then you can start to think about, okay, what is causing the gaps in the communication? And really, it's helpful to start out by asking what tendencies your team has based on how you work and how you're set up. So, here's just a few different things that could affect how you work, and some of those tendencies and so some of those defaults that could cause communication problems. So obviously you probably know all of these things and where you're at here, but it's good to kind of just take a look and see, identify some of those tendencies that might happen. So, if you're an agency or an in-house team, that can make a big difference. If you're working on a SaaS product or a product, you're on a product team, that could all affect, some of those different techniques. Design team structure. Are you a centralized design team? Meaning, is there a design team culture? Do you meet regularly? Do you have a shared approach? Or is it more decentralized where you have teams that have multiple disciplines on them? So, you might have a product owner or product manager, developers and designers on these other teams that are just tackling certain problems in your product or working for different clients. And then your product methodology also can affect this. So whether you work in an agile process or waterfall or you're hybrid or another process, those all lend themselves to different ways that you might have gaps in communication. And then pricing. If you're an agency, you might price differently, obviously. So it could be hourly, by the sprint, project pricing, value pricing. All these things can kind of affect, and combination of these things too can kind of affect how you communicate and how you work well with developers and design. So let's take a quick example here. So we have agency X here, who's in an agency model. They have a centralized design team. They use a waterfall methodology and they price hourly. So if we look at like a path of a project, which you can imagine is this line, this horizontal line, you can start to see, okay, we have a big gap, between design and development because we really front load our projects with design. Design's done, they've done their thing, client has approved it, and then they pass it off to developers. And this is a pretty common example. Some of your examples might be a little bit more subtle, but this one's pretty obvious. But what are the causes of this? It might be because you're an agency, you have other clients who need projects done, and you've got another project starting up that you need designers on, so they've got to jump on to the next thing. Or you might, if you bill hourly like this agency, you've used up your design budget. You had a bucket of hours for UX and design, and you use that up, and you don't have any more left for design for the project. So as you might think, that's just not enough to just identify those gaps. You got to fill the gaps. So this is number 2. So identify some actions that you can take to address these issues. And it's always good to kind of prioritize those actions, because they might be things that you can, some of them might be like low-hanging fruit that you can attack pretty easily. Some of them you can like experiment on projects and try out. And some of them might involve some more stakeholders. They might involve some other decisions from management or things that you just don't have the authority to do. But so prioritize those things and then start to take action on those. So if we go back to our example here, where we've identified this gap, what about trying something like this where the project path looks a little bit different? There's some overlap between UX and design and development. And, these dotted lines that I'm showing here at the bottom indicate, you're on the project, but it might be in different, you're not full-time on it. You might be in different meetings, just getting context for the project. So bringing development into some early conversations. Maybe they're not even writing any code at this point, but they're just getting context for the project, offering some feedback, some insight. And then same with design. As design kind of tails off and you're finishing up the UX and design effort, you're staying involved periodically throughout the project and doing some check-ins, making sure things are on track. And so some things you can do that you'll need to do this, would be for this specific example, I should say, would be to allow some flexibility in designer schedules and increase hourly budget. So it'll take a little bit more time from folks on projects to be involved this long, and also a little bit of flexibility in schedule as well. If you're interested in diving more into some of these like high-level team structures and things, there's some really interesting resources here. This O'Reilly book, Org Design for Design Orgs, is a great one. It's pretty in-house focused, but if you're an agency like us, there's some really great things you can take away. They do a deep dive into a lot of different parts of team structure and titles and scaling and things like that. So it's a great resource. And then the Design Genome Project. This is by Envision. It's been out for a few years, but it's an interesting study into I think 15 different companies, some bigger companies, on how they run their design teams, how they structure projects, and how that looks in their organization. So really cool insight in there too. So, all right, moving along here. So number 3, be proactive and not reactive. So for you 7 Habits of Highly Effective People fans, this is number 1. I just totally ripped it off. But it's really important because I think as designers, we have the tendency sometimes to be reactive. And that's okay. That needs to happen sometimes if we see things that aren't right. But being proactive, we can kind of head some of those things off at the pass, so to speak. So you can anticipate development needs. So, a developer is going to need the icons you created as SVGs. So you'll get those all exported for them. And so some of those little things that you can do, some things around documentation, letting a developer know why you made the decisions you made. You can kind of annotate those things in Sketch or in Figma, right into some of the artifacts that you've made. And then another good thing to do is incorporating regular design reviews during the build. So if you're working in a sprint or an agile kind of form, in Jira, maybe make a lane for design reviews. And that way it's a shared understanding with the team too, that they know those things need to happen during the project and not just kind of dropping into the project whenever it's convenient for you and kind of blowing things up that way. And then figure out how joining regular demos and planning meetings throughout the project might work for you. So this might be different from project to project, but figure out what a good cadence is there to kind of keep a good pulse on the project as it's being developed, and then be able to give feedback. So those are kind of two different sides of the coin there. So how to keep up to date, know what's going on, and share feedback. Figure out what meetings are good there, and that's a good thing to just kind of talk about with your project manager as the project starts and as it continues. So this is an example of kind of being proactive with design. This is something that this is a Figma document that Andrew, who will be sharing later, made for our design team. We call it the design starter file. Basically, it gives you, some obvious things to start with. You document colors, project spacing, kind of system, typography, hierarchy there, some form fields, some buttons, icons, and things like that. So it was kind of intended to be a bit of a head start for design, but it also serves as a one-stop shop for a developer to come in and say, okay, I got everything I need right here to start the project and get things set up. So that's just one simple example. All right, number 4, meet halfway. So this is kind of about designers doing their part to meet halfway, and the hope is, you're establishing kind of a culture that everybody would kind of do this. So really starting with being available, making sure you have time to meet and give feedback on the project as it's being developed. Offer to do some pairing in the browser. Ask opinions of people. And really that kind of segues into being humble. Nobody really likes working with that designer who's got the big ego, right? They want to work together as a team. That's how we're going to build the best products. And then, making the effort to understand other team members' pain points. So having empathy. So for example, if a developer is working on a really tough thing that you've designed, and technically it's really hard, you're under time constraints, you're under budget constraints, that might be, a great place to say, hey, is there another way we could do this? They might ask you that, but be receptive to that, because everybody's got different constraints and everybody's got different things that are happening on the project, different goals. Hopefully there's a shared goal for the project, but understand the role of the other person. And you might have to make a compromise every now and then. And that happens too on projects. And then learn a little HTML and CSS. It doesn't hurt to do that at all. This is an example of using the developer tools in Chrome just to jump in and do some inspecting of, as things take shape in the browser, and seeing how things are set up. The great thing about this is it kind of levels up both a designer and developer. Designer can get in there and see how things are structured a little bit. They can look at, let's play around with this. This margin should be 1 rem and not 0.5. You can kind of start to see how things are structured. And then if you pair with a developer in the browser and kind of do this, they can kind of see what your vision and plan is for this. You can kind of talk through what your vision is for spacing or for some of those polish things that you tend to have a tail at the end of a project. And then finally, and this is kind of like what we've been talking about all along, and Julie talked about this a little bit too, is really just embracing a culture of collaboration. So inviting developers into early discussions and processes and critiques really helps give everyone on the team a shared sense of ownership. They have context. They feel like they know kind of what the goals are of the project rather than just being told or directed on what to do. And ask for and value opinions of all team members as well. Make sure that, everybody's being heard. You could be the person that's kind of making sure that everybody's voice is being heard in a meeting. Maybe invite the project team into your Figma file if you use Figma. One of the greatest things that we like about Figma is the collaborative feature of it. Sometimes as designers, we tend to try to rope off. We don't want people looking over our shoulder when we're in progress designing things. But you could set up your file in a way that kind of like sections off things that are in progress, things that are ready for development. This is a really cool way to really bring the whole team. And designers like this, or developers I've found, like to be involved and see how things are taking shape too. And it's a good way for them to ask questions. And then finally, help build an understanding of UX and design principles. So Julie talked about this a little bit, really kind of building a culture around that, taking opportunities for whenever you get a chance, maybe it's a lunch and learn or something, on talking about UX and design. So here's a really simple example of using the Figma integration for Slack, where at Sparkbox we have project channels in Slack, and the whole team's in there, and so we surface comments from Figma in there. So everybody has the chance to see what's going on, what's being talked about. We're using Figma's collaborative features and commenting features to be able to chat about things specific to a project. And then Julie talked about this a little bit too, our book club. This is a great way to not only level up in UX and design thinking and kind of, talking about some of the things that these books go into, but it's also a great way to build empathy with each other and talk about, really listen to other people and what their perception of some of these concepts are. And I feel like that's really the most value that comes out of those is, just talking with people that have other disciplines in your company and really kind of building that rapport with each other. All right, so I know that was quick, but to summarize, 5 remedies for addressing your team's communication gaps. First, identify the gaps, fill the gaps, be proactive and not reactive, meet halfway, and embrace a culture of collaboration.
Hey, thanks again for checking out this video. If you want to learn more about how we're building a better web, visit us at sparkbox.com.